He placed his trembling pension slip on the teller window, only to watch it tear to confetti, until the vault doors echoed with armored boots. 82 years of life had etched themselves onto Arthur's face, a roadmap of sun-baked fields, the grit of foreign dust, and the quiet dignity of a man who'd served. His steps, though slower now, held the ingrained discipline of a soldier, a faint echo of parades, long past, as he approached the polished marble counter of the First National Bank. The clock above the teller line read 9 a.m., the precise moment the doors had officially swished open, releasing the sterile, recycled air of the lobby. He carried his pension slip, a thin, off-white piece of cardstock, like a fragile truce offering. Just let me get this done, then I can go home. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead was a low, oppressive drone, a stark contrast to the quiet symphony of crickets and rustling leaves he preferred. He cleared his throat, a dry rasp against the silence, and finally reached the window, where a young man with an impossibly smooth face and eyes, already glazed over with routine, looked up, a forced, brittle smile twitching at the corners of his mouth. The young man, barely out of his 20s, didn't bother with a greeting. His eyes, dark and dismissive, flicked from Arthur's worn but clean tweed jacket to the pension slip in his hand, a fleeting glance that seemed to register only inconvenience. Arthur extended the slip across the counter, his fingers, gnarled with age and the memory of countless rifle grips, trembling just a fraction. "Good morning," Arthur said, his voice a low rumble, betraying nothing of the anxiety coiling in his gut. "I'm here to deposit my pension." The teller, whose name tag read Kevin, offered a faint, almost imperceptible sigh, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 trivial transactions. He took the slip with 2 fingers, as if handling something distasteful, and barely glanced at the vital numbers printed across its face. Kevin's gaze remained fixed on some distant point beyond Arthur's shoulder, a vacant stare that communicated a profound disinterest. He rotated the slip in his hand, a careless flick of the wrist, and then, without a word, turned to the side, his back half obscured by a bulky piece of office equipment. A harsh click announced the shredder's teeth engaging, a sudden, violent tearing sound that ripped through the quiet morning air. Arthur's breath caught in his throat. No, he wouldn't. He couldn't. The sound was unmistakable, a mechanical hunger devouring paper. He leaned forward, his knuckles white against the cool marble, his eyes fixed on the sliver of cardstock disappearing into the maw of the machine. The smooth, practiced movement of Kevin's hand as he fed the slip was almost hypnotic, a grotesque ballet of destruction. A single, thin strip of off-white paper fluttered onto the counter, a ragged, confetti-like fragment that landed directly in front of Arthur's trembling hand. It was a corner, just a sliver of the original, an insultingly small reminder of what had just been destroyed. The fine dust of paper, a faint, almost imperceptible coating, settled on his calloused fingers as he reached out, a raw, primal urge to reclaim what was lost. The sterile scent of toner and cold metal, usually unnoticed, now assailed him, a suffocating blanket that pressed down on his chest. Kevin turned back, his face devoid of expression, a blank canvas of indifference. "Is there a problem, sir?" he asked, his voice flat, a carefully constructed neutrality that grated on Arthur's ears. "I risked my life overseas. How dare they shred my future?" The thought screamed in Arthur's mind, a silent explosion of fury and disbelief. He looked at the fragment of paper, then at Kevin's impassive face, searching for a flicker of recognition, a hint of regret, anything that would betray a human being beneath the bank uniform. There was nothing, just a polite, practiced emptiness. The humiliation burned, a hot, searing wave that threatened to engulf him. He had faced down machine guns, walked through minefields, endured freezing nights and scorching days, all for a future that in this moment felt like it had just been torn into 1,000 worthless pieces by a callous clerk. He straightened his shoulders, the old soldier's resolve slowly pushing through the initial shock. "You just shredded my pension slip," Arthur stated, his voice low and steady, each word a deliberate hammer blow against the silence. He didn't raise his voice, didn't yell, didn't descend into the rage that threatened to consume him. That wasn't his way. His calm was more unnerving than any outburst. A faint blush crept up Kevin's neck, a tiny crack in his facade of indifference, but his eyes remained stubbornly blank. He offered a slight, almost imperceptible shrug. "We're unable to process damaged documents, sir. You'll need to request a new one." The words were rehearsed, a rote response pulled from some corporate manual, and they hung in the air, dripping with an almost casual cruelty. The sheer audacity, the dismissiveness, was a fresh wound. Before we continue with the story, be sure to let us know where you're watching from and what time it is in the comments. We love learning about our viewers. Now let's get back to the story. Arthur's gaze hardened, focusing on Kevin's name tag. Kevin. The name tasted like ash. He had faced down enemies with guns, but this quiet, bureaucratic assault felt far more insidious, a betrayal from within. The soft murmurs of other patrons in the lobby, previously just background noise, now seemed to swell, a vague, indistinct chorus that amplified the injustice. He could feel eyes on him, curious glances from people who had witnessed the terse exchange, the unceremonious destruction of his vital document. The fluorescent glare on the polished floor seemed to intensify, reflecting back the stark reality of his shredded future. He inhaled slowly, deeply, the scent of fresh coffee from the bank's small waiting area now cloying, almost offensive. A cold, steely resolve began to set in. This wasn't just about a pension slip. This was about respect, about dignity, about the quiet sacrifices of a generation that was slowly being forgotten. He had fought for the freedom this young man so carelessly enjoyed, and now that same freedom was being weaponized against him in the most petty, bureaucratic way imaginable. He noticed a CCTV camera, a small, unblinking eye, mounted high in the corner of the lobby, its red light a faint, steady glow. Good. He would ensure every moment of this humiliation was recorded. Let them see. Let the world see. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. He reached into his inner jacket pocket, his movements slow and deliberate, and pulled out his phone. It was an older model, a flip phone, not a sleek smartphone, but it worked. He wasn't about to cause a scene, not in the way Kevin might expect. He simply pressed a single speed dial button. The faint, almost imperceptible click of the phone connecting was a small personal declaration of war. Kevin watched him, his blank expression now tinged with a flicker of annoyance, a slight narrowing of his eyes. He probably assumed Arthur was calling a relative, or perhaps complaining to customer service. He had no idea the gravity of the call that was quietly connecting, the ripple effect that was about to spread from this unassuming bank lobby. The silence in the bank branch stretched, taut and charged, punctuated only by the distant clatter of a keyboard and the low hum of the air conditioning. Kevin shifted his weight, his patience visibly wearing thin, as Arthur stood, phone pressed to his ear, his gaze unwavering. The shredder, a silent sentinel of destruction, sat on the counter, its final whir froze mid-cycle. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, as Arthur remained fixed to the spot, his phone a silent extension of his unwavering resolve. Kevin, still leaning slightly back, now tapped his pen against the counter, a nervous, almost imperceptible rhythm that betrayed a nascent irritation. He cleared his throat. "Sir, I really must ask you to step aside. There are other customers waiting." The words were edged with a faint impatience, a flicker of condescension that did little to ease the tension. Arthur didn't move. He simply waited, his eyes, tired but piercing, fixed on the young teller. Let them wait, let them see. He could feel the eyes of the few other patrons, a small elderly woman clutching a deposit slip, a young man absorbed in his phone, occasionally darting glances in their direction. The digital clock above the teller line seemed to tick louder, each second a slow, deliberate beat in the unfolding drama. A low, guttural voice answered on the other end of Arthur's phone, a voice that spoke of steel and unwavering authority. "General Albright, state your emergency." Arthur took a steadying breath. "General, this is Master Sergeant Arthur Caldwell, retired. I'm at the First National Bank, downtown branch. I believe there's been a misunderstanding regarding my pension." He kept his voice level, devoid of emotion, a practiced military calm that belied the tremor in his hands. Kevin's eyes, which had been idly scanning the lobby, now snapped back to Arthur, a sudden dawning comprehension beginning to etch itself onto his face. The word general hung in the air, a silent, almost physical presence that seemed to deflate some of Kevin's easy arrogance. The faint tapping of his pen ceased. A misunderstanding. He shredded it. There was no misunderstanding, just malice. The silent indignation burned brighter. He continued, still speaking to the phone, but his voice now carried a deliberate projection that filled the quiet space. The teller here, a Mr. Kevin, just shredded my pension slip. Claims it was damaged after he himself handled it. He paused, allowing the weight of the accusation to settle. Kevin's face, which had been a study in practiced indifference, now began to pale, a sickly white creeping up from his collar. His eyes darted nervously towards the CCTV camera, a sudden flicker of awareness that he was indeed being watched, recorded. The sterile hum of the lights now felt like a buzzing accusation. A low murmur rippled through the small line of customers, a whisper of recognition, a rustle of discomfort. The elderly woman gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. The young man looked up from his phone, his casual indifference replaced by a sudden, intense focus. Arthur remained impassive, an old lion unbothered by the growing noise, his attention solely on the voice on the other end of the line. He didn't even look at it, General, just fed it straight into the machine, said I needed to request a new one. As if it's that simple. The bitterness was a faint, almost imperceptible undertone in his voice, but it was there, a sharp, metallic taste. Kevin's hands began to clench and unclench beneath the counter, his composure rapidly unraveling. On the phone, General Albright's voice, now sharper, more urgent, cut through the line. Stay put, Master Sergeant. Do not move. Do not let anyone touch that machine. We're on our way. Estimated time of arrival. 4 minutes. Do you copy? Arthur's gaze never left Kevin's face, which had now turned a distinct shade of green. Copy. General, I'm not going anywhere. He clicked the phone shut, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the sudden, profound silence of the lobby. The simple act of ending the call felt like the dropping of a gauntlet. Kevin swallowed hard, his throat bobbing visibly. His eyes, wide with a dawning horror, darted from Arthur to the shredded paper, then to the CCTV, then back to Arthur. He looked like a cornered animal, suddenly aware of the trap. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with anticipation. The other customers in the lobby were now openly staring, their whispers hushed but audible, their collective attention fixed on the dramatic tableau unfolding before them. The young man who had been on his phone was now clearly recording, his device held up discreetly, its lens trained on Arthur and Kevin. The small fragment of Arthur's pension slip still lay on the counter, a poignant testament to the clerk's casual cruelty. The overhead lights seemed to pulse, reflecting off the polished surfaces, making the entire scene feel stark, almost cinematic. Arthur stood unmoving, his posture ramrod straight, a quiet defiance radiating from him. Suddenly, a side door near the bank manager's office swung open, and a portly man in a too-tight suit, his face flushed with irritation, emerged. This was Mr. Henderson, the branch manager. He had clearly been alerted to the growing commotion. "What is going on here, Kevin?" he demanded, his voice a huff of exasperation, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. He glanced at Arthur, then at the shredded paper, then at the recording phone, his expression shifting from annoyance to a dawning alarm. Kevin, still frozen, could only stammer, he called. Someone. His voice was a thin, reedy sound, barely audible. Mr. Henderson approached, his steps heavy and measured, his gaze sweeping over the growing audience. He tried to offer a conciliatory smile to Arthur, a practiced, plastic expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Sir, is there some issue we can resolve? Perhaps a misunderstanding?" His voice was smoother than Kevin's, coated with a thin veneer of corporate concern, but Arthur saw through it instantly. "A misunderstanding? They shredded my life, and he calls it a misunderstanding." He pointed to the shredded paper. "Your employee, Mr. Kevin, just destroyed my pension slip. He then told me I needed to request a new one, after he himself rendered it unusable. His voice was still calm, but the underlying steel was unmistakable, a quiet threat that reverberated through the now silent lobby. Mr. Henderson's face, already flushed, now turned a shade of crimson. He glanced at Kevin, a furious, unspoken question in his eyes. Kevin winced, shrinking back against the teller window. The manager then looked back at Arthur, his polite facade cracking under the weight of the accusation. He opened his mouth to speak, likely to offer another empty apology or a bureaucratic solution, but then a low, distant drone began to fill the air, a sound that slowly, steadily grew in intensity. It was a familiar sound, one that Arthur recognized instantly, a sound that brought a faint, grim satisfaction to his weathered face. It was the low thrum of powerful engines heading their way. The drone sharpened, growing louder, closer, the distinct roar of multiple vehicles approaching at speed. It was the sound of heavy machinery, the unmistakable rumble of powerful engines tightening its grip on the surrounding streets, the distant drone of unmarked cars sharpening. The low thrum of the approaching vehicles crescendoed, shaking the very foundations of the bank branch. Mr. Henderson, his face now a mask of frantic confusion, spun towards the large plate glass windows at the front of the lobby, his eyes wide with a dawning terror. Kevin, meanwhile, had retreated further into the corner, a trembling shadow against the pristine white wall. The other customers, now a captivated audience, pressed closer to the windows, their faces etched with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The air crackled with a palpable tension, a pre-storm stillness before the inevitable deluge. Arthur, however, remained rooted to his spot, his gaze fixed on the double doors of the bank, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing at the corners of his lips. "They're here." Mr. Henderson, finally recognizing the ominous nature of the sound, fumbled for his cell phone, his fingers shaking as he tried to dial. He pressed the phone to his ear, his voice a frantic whisper. "Security, this is Henderson. What's going on?" There's a convoy approaching. Looks like federal vehicles." His eyes, wide and darting, scanned the street outside, where the first of several dark, unmarked SUVs were now pulling up to the curb, their black windows reflecting the harsh morning light like obsidian. The sight sent a fresh wave of panic through him, and he dropped his phone, the clatter echoing loudly on the polished floor. Before Mr. Henderson could even bend to retrieve his phone, the double doors of the bank burst inward with a resounding crash, slamming against the interior walls. A squad of figures, clad in dark tactical gear, swarmed into the lobby. They moved with a chilling precision, their movements fluid and practiced, weapons held at the ready. Their faces were grim, their eyes scanning the room, assessing threats, taking in the scene with a cold, professional detachment. The lead agent, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, pointed a gloved hand directly at Kevin. "Freeze, federal agents." Her voice was crisp, authoritative, cutting through the stunned silence like a razor. The sudden, overwhelming presence of the agents sent a collective gasp through the lobby. Customers recoiled, some letting out small cries of alarm, scrambling backward, pressing themselves against the walls. Mr. Henderson, frozen mid-crouch, stared at the approaching agents with wide, disbelieving eyes. Kevin, caught in the beam of a tactical flashlight, whimpered, his hands shooting up in surrender. The lead agent, her eyes still locked on Kevin, spoke into a comms device clipped to her shoulder. "Suspect secured. Evidence located at teller station 3. Her gaze flicked to the shredder, then to the fragments of paper on the counter, a flicker of cold anger in her eyes. "Not on my watch." Two agents immediately moved to cordon off Kevin's teller station, one carefully collecting the shredded paper fragments with gloved hands, placing them into an evidence bag. Another agent approached Mr. Henderson, who was still trying to stammer out an explanation. "Sir, we need your full cooperation. You are to remain calm and answer all our questions. No one leaves this building until further notice." The agent's voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. The branch manager, his face ashen, could only nod mutely, his attempts at composure completely shattered. The sterile hum of the lights now felt like a buzzing accusation, every blink of the CCTV camera a judgment. The lead agent, having confirmed Kevin's capture, turned her attention to Arthur. Her expression softened, a subtle shift in her features that spoke of respect and understanding. She approached him slowly, deliberately, her gaze meeting his. "Master Sergeant Caldwell?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. Arthur nodded, his eyes meeting hers, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. "Agent Miller, Federal Bureau of Investigation. General Albright sends his regards. We received your call." The mention of the general's name seemed to reverberate through the space, adding another layer of gravity to the already tense atmosphere. The weight of swift, uncompromising accountability settled heavily in the room. Agent Miller then gestured to the shredded paper on the counter. "We understand there was an issue with your pension slip, sir." Her tone was empathetic, a stark contrast to the dismissive cruelty Arthur had faced minutes earlier. Arthur merely nodded, his gaze unwavering. He watched as the agents meticulously documented the scene, taking photographs, bagging the evidence, their movements precise and efficient. The sheer speed and coordination of their response was a testament to the power of the call he had made, a silent roar of federal boots marching into action. He felt a quiet vindication spreading through him, a warmth slowly replacing the cold knot of humiliation. One of the agents, a burly man with a gentle face, approached Arthur and offered him a small, clean plastic bag. Inside were the collected fragments of his pension slip. "We'll need these for forensic analysis, sir," he said, his voice respectful. "But we wanted to make sure you saw that we're taking this seriously." Arthur looked at the bag, the tiny confetti-like pieces of his financial future, and then back at the agent. A faint smile touched his lips, a rare sight that softened the weathered lines of his face. He nodded his thanks, a silent acknowledgement of their professionalism. The indignity he had suffered, now held in an evidence bag, was being addressed. The entire lobby was now a scene of controlled chaos. Agents were interviewing witnesses, securing the premises, their voices low and urgent. The once pristine bank, now a scene of federal investigation, felt dramatically altered. Kevin, his hands still bound, was being led away by two agents, his head bowed in shame. Mr. Henderson, leaning against a wall, was engaged in a heated, whispered conversation with another agent, his face still pale and anxious. Arthur watched it all, his eyes taking in every detail, every nuance of the swift, decisive action. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting long, dramatic shadows across the marble floor. As the last of the agents prepared to escort Kevin out, Arthur, standing tall and resolute, slowly lifted his right hand. His calloused fingers, which had once cradled a rifle and now trembled slightly with age, rose to his temple, forming a perfect, crisp salute. It was a silent, powerful gesture of honor, a final declaration of dignity in the face of betrayal. The lead agent, Agent Miller, saw it. She met his gaze, and with a slight inclination of her head, returned the salute, a silent promise of justice. The hushed countdown before the vault door swung open.